Hi there, welcome on this week's Pascal's China Lens, and I want to talk about what I believe will be the hottest topic that we will talk about this year when it comes to China. And this will be about the digital currency. It sounds very boring, but it will change the financial world, and in my view it will start the space race on money between the US and China any day soon. If you haven't subscribed yet on my channel, do so now. I would really appreciate. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers, and you know I'm aiming for 100,000 this year, so I can use a few more. So we're always talking about this war between US and China, whether it's an AI war or a space race or semiconductors or military. I mean, there's all these tensions. But I think the real possibility of a true war between China and America is actually going to be about money. It's going to be about finance, paper money. And if we think about paper money, then actually it goes back to the Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty, where China was the inventor of paper money. And so they know quite a lot about paper money. But today, the US dollar is dominating the world's money. And so what is happening these days is that for the past 5-6 years, since 2014 about, we've really seen China take off into the digital currency. You can call it digital currency 1.0. It was about mobile payment, now it's about face payment, but it's really about connecting the Alipays and the WeChat Pays with the bank account, your bank account, and everybody in China was using it. And so most cities have become cashless in China, where more than 90% these days are using mobile payment on a daily basis. And so this has changed society completely. And unless you've lived in China, experienced it, you don't really understand how that has changed the way of doing business. And I believe this is now going to the next level. But what we've seen the last 6-9 months is really a complete change in the financial world. And everything is about digital. You've seen Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies go really crazy, specifically when Elon Musk said you can buy a Tesla now. You've seen the Libra from Facebook that is now changed into a diem in Switzerland, and that is now trying to make a stable coin, launching at the end of this year probably. So it seems to be happening. You see Alipay that had to stop the IPO because of regulators. So there's a lot of discussion on assets and what you need to keep on the books and so on. And then there's the CBDC, the Chinese or the central bank's digital currency that is actually been in testing for almost a year now, since August last year, and is completely changing all the parameters of financial business. So what is this all about? Well, the digital currency 2.0 is the CBDC, the central bank's digital currency. And this is launched by the Beijing People's Bank of China. And many countries in the world are now investigating to do a CBDC. I mean, there's already the Bahamas, there's in Cambodia, there's many countries that are looking into this, have launched it already. And you see even Europe is looking into it. So this is a big thing happening. But when we look at the CBDC, in China it's called DCEP, that currency. It's the digital currency for electronic payment, DCEP. And this is actually real money. But it's digital money. So it's like real cash, like paper money from the Tang Dynasty or just today what you use as real cash, but it's digital, which means it sits on your phone. And that means you can transfer it to someone without having a need for a bank account. And vendors who want to sell you something have to accept it because it's like real money. And that's the big difference with digital payment 1.0. With Alipay and WeChat Pay, you didn't really have to accept it, although most people did. Now, the big difference with cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on, is that it's not on the blockchain. I mean, the Bitcoin is about 7 transactions a second, and the CBDC or DCEP is about 200,000 transactions a second. Same like WeChat or Alipay. The number of transactions is just so much, the standard blockchain would just not work. It's also centralized, which means Beijing is actually controlling, or the People's Bank of China. It's not decentralized, so it's within one entity. And so that creates a very different environment. It's also not anonymous like crypto often is. You need the key to get access, but you don't really know who has that key. and it's also mandatory, so you have to use it or accept it as if it's real money. So that's the big differences with crypto. So it's kind of a different beast, but it's based on encryption as well. Now, the main challenge here is that privacy is a concern for many people. And in China, the People's Bank of China said very clearly that for the digital yuan, or the DCEP, they will make sure that there's full anonymity or privacy. They take the privacy very high into their concerns. And so that means that most people who buy coffee or send money to someone or buy something more expensive like a bicycle or a car, the government doesn't need to know. The central banks definitely don't need to know. It's just when you use a lot of money and there's fraud involved or tax invasions, that's when horizontally the anonymity is not as clear as it would be in Switzerland, for example, although that these days has changed as well. But a lot of people in the world are saying, like, this is now the change into society where a central entity is actually controlling everybody when it comes to the digital payment. And through that, they know actually what everybody does. So the end of privacy. But it would be a mistake to think that in the West, specifically in America, that does not exist. I mean, if you're in criminality or you're tax evasion, they will find your traces of financial transactions as well. And there's a lot of data as well. Now, I'm not saying there's no difference, but I do believe that China is taking care of that privacy much more than we think they are. Now, the real challenges of the CBDC and DCEP in China is that the intermediate banks, the financial institutions, will become less relevant because this new digital currency could be used between people and businesses without the needs of banks. That means that the banks will need to charge a higher cost for their deposits because otherwise they can't afford their big buildings and big cars anymore, the bankers. Now, the other thing is that the financial anonymity and the privacy concerns are still a real concern to be thought about. And that's maybe what some Western countries is actually a reason to actually delay the CBDC of their own. But when we look at anonymity and we compare it with Alipay or WeChat Pay, actually it's much better because there Alibaba and Tencent has all that data, all that information, and there's not as much regulation. Now there starts to be with the anti-monopoly law, but there's not the same regulation and privacy laws that actually abide according to for these companies, which means it's safer that Beijing takes control over it than actually some of the banks or some of the payment systems. Now, how does it really work? It's a three-tier system, and I'm not going to go in detail, but basically the first tier is the Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, central bank, and they distribute, they issue these DCEPs to the local banks, the commercial banks, and the payment partners, and they then give it to consumers and to businesses. And between consumers and businesses, you don't need the banks involved anymore. Well, today, you often do. And that is the big change. And if you want your cash back, you can go back towards the bank and get the cash back because it's transferable, one-on-one. One renminbi is one digital renminbi. Now, the reason China is really focused on this is for a number of things. This is an internal matter. So we talk a lot about the US dollar and the renminbi and that this is kind of like a war. But reality for China, this has to become a healthy system. And what they see as main advantages is the policies on monetary and fiscal could actually be much better in a digital environment, a digital currency 2.0 environment. It would really help inclusion. And they've seen that with Alipay and WeChat Pay, that millions, hundreds of millions of people who didn't have a bank account actually could do transactions and do trade and earn some money. And by doing that, get out of poverty. So this is really good for inclusion. Also good for a lot of other countries in the world that have that same problem. It's good for the transactions, the cost is going down, it's going much faster, and of course for criminal control and making sure that China stays safe in some areas, and also that there's no tax evasion and scams, which is a big problem in China still. So this is really for internal reasons that they're putting so much effort into launching this DCEP. Now, a book that I can really recommend is from Richard Turin. It just came out this week, and he talks about this digital currency revolution. And I do believe this is truly a revolution. 1.0 was a revolution for China. 2.0 will be a revolution for the world. That's what I believe. Now, what it isn't, this digital currency, is a threat to a number of things. It's not against Alipay or Alibaba or Tencent, because they are just like banks going to receive this money from the People's Bank of China and then distribute it, and they will be able to use it again to offer different services. It's not against fintech, it's not against the cryptocurrency. Actually, the cryptocurrencies are benefiting from this DCEP right now, and it's definitely not something against to create a standard, a global Chinese standard for payments. Although the Chinese government wants a standard for digital payments, it's probably not going to become a Chinese standard. And the People's Bank of China and all the Chinese governors are saying very clearly that this is not to take over the US dollar. Now, is it or is it not? Because there are some external concerns. I mean, one of the biggest external worries of China is the sanctions that the US is putting against certain countries. Think about Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Syria. I mean, there's a lot of sanctions, financial, and they're using their power of the banking system, the financial system, to block certain accounts and make sure that people cannot deliver to these countries. And if you do, you get sanctioned as well. And so this is a real huge power of the US. And China, of course, is worried about that, because we've seen already with Huawei and many other companies that they've been blacklisted, and so there are sanctions against them already, so this could extend much broader. So China needs an alternative. The DCEP, or the central bank's digital currency, could be that alternative over time. The other thing is that China has been trying to internationalize their currency, but there's been an uphill battle. And the reason it's been an uphill battle is because it's not transferable easily. You can't convert the renminbi against the dollar just on the market. You can do it in Hong Kong and some other places, but it's really hard. And so that is a big issue. It's only 2% of all the reserves in the world is actually linked to the renminbi. While China is doing much more, almost 12% of the global trade, and 20% almost of the GDP of the world, 18%. So that's a big difference. So it's not in comparison. The other thing is that the central bank in America, the Federal Reserve, and the chairman, Powell, is really saying that he's not too worried about these cryptocurrencies. He's not too worried about this CBDC and central bank's digital currency. For him, it's like our financial institution has actually been running pretty well. And I must say, it's probably much more advanced than the Chinese banks when it comes to insight and intelligence in how to run these financial services. But the problem is now we're looking at a different type of service. This is all about digital 2.0. And the thing that I think the US is missing here in their comfort zone is a little bit the same that you could see in many of the other technologies that were evolving. Think about AI. Think about IoT, so a smart infrastructure. Think about 5G, fast communication. Think about blockchain. These are the things. 5 years ago, the US wasn't too concerned about China developing AI. They weren't too concerned about China doing 5G. And today they're not concerned about China in their blockchain and also not in CBDC. And maybe they shouldn't be concerned on each of them separately. But once you start combining them, then that's a very different story. Then you're really working this in concert. And specifically when you look at logistics, smart logistics, the external world, where China is still the biggest factory of the world and sending all these things to the world, but also importing a lot, then we see that 95% almost of all the currencies that are used to do that import and export is the US dollar. And so if you now combine all these technologies into the logistic world, then it becomes a very different story on smart logistics. And you can have a real smart network, very, very fast, very trusted, and you could save a lot of money. So which trader would not want that? And in order to get these four things together, you need the CBDC. And so China in their trade could actually topple the US dollar in their way of doing trade with the world. Now, the interesting thing is that China is not wanting to displace the US dollar. But it might happen automatically, slowly. And that is because right now, if you do trade, what you need to do is actually to get a loan from a bank very often to secure yourself against the volatility of currency exchanges, but also maybe because all these people need to pay you still, so you get a loan and then the bank charges you some interest on that, but that money sits on a deposit for 3, 4, 5 months before all the products arrive and everybody's paid and everything's done. And that's just stupid money. So this reserve money, which some people say is about 16 trillion US dollars, is sitting there in US dollars mainly, a little bit in euro, because that is the system that everybody knows. But now with all these technologies, IoT, 5G and blockchain and so on, and China has created the biggest blockchain in the world, you could actually verify at every step of every intermediate logistic what has happened. Which means you don't need these deposits for the whole range, you just need it for that little part. And that means a lot of volatility in using money and using it like you want yourself. And so it could be very well that the 16 trillion US dollars that the US has in their bank account, or basically in their reserves, is now going to fade away or melt away little by little, because alternative CBDC is actually pretty interesting for traders. And then there's the 8 trillion of debt that the US has against other countries, which is also owned partially by China and Japan and others. So this could all change and topple away as well. Now, I think specifically when we look at the Belt and Road and the 140 countries in the world that are doing business with China, I don't see a downside of switching from the US dollar to the renminbi or the digital currency renminbi at this stage, because they do business constantly with China, so it's in their benefit. It will be cheaper, faster, safer. So why not? And we already see that the international organizations like SWIFT, which is really controlling the money flows everywhere in the world and regulating them, they are already partnering with China, with the CIPS, and so they're already trying together to actually make sure that China can do international trade and cross-border investments and payments. And so this is going to happen whether we want it or not, and every country will start setting up its own CBDC. That's just a fact. Now, I think right now what is happening is that China has, for the past 7 years, because it started in 2014, been developing this DCEP, CBDC, and so after 7 years, it's getting pretty mature. The whole backend is finished, it's working, it's been tested in dozens of cities. There's 10,000s of merchants using it or accepting the money already. You can see it in vending machines, and so the whole infrastructure is starting to get there in China. And by the Winter Olympics, that is the moment. In February next year, they will probably launch this DCEP for the whole China, and so for the world as well, automatically. And that is the moment that I believe that this digital currency 2.0 in China, the DCEP, is actually going to fly high, and they will show the world, although it looks like a really dark area to go into, they will show the world that this is a new way of looking at finance. And in my view, the US dollar should actually be worried. So I believe the world of banking will be the most sexy and exciting topic that we will talk about in 2021. And the interesting thing about China is that they have perfected this system of the CBDC over the past 7-8 years. And so this is not just a new cool idea of China. This is really optimizing a system that worked perfect almost with Alipay and WeChat Pay, and this now is going to go much broader and is going to take off globally. So we all have to watch what China's doing this year on CBDC to see how our life will look like in 3 or 5 years from now. Hope you liked it, and see you next week for another episode on Pascal's China Lens.